We've got another real-life business problem for Rocketblock's experts to solve in today's mock interview. Today's case was written to be difficult. There's a ton of data thrown at the candidate during the prompt and in the exhibits. The client's business model is unfamiliar, and there's a heavy math component as well. Pay attention as Chris creates order from the chaos with methodical calculations and clear frameworks. As a reminder, you can't learn a new language by watching foreign films, and it's the same thing for casing. You have to be practicing actively and deliberately to pick up a new skill. At the very least, pause this video after each question to attempt your own answer out loud, and when you're ready to build your foundational skills for real, come to Rocketblocks to use our drills and read our concepts. Good luck and have fun casing.
So your client today is FederalTrust Bank. They're a mid-sized financial institution looking to expand its presence in the government sector. The bank is evaluating whether to bid on the upcoming government purchase card program contract, a highly competitive and strategically important opportunity. Since its inception in the late 90s, the government purchase card program has been the largest charge card program globally, processing about 40 billion in payments annually and providing federal employees with a method for making purchases and the government a source of funding through net refunds. The program operates similarly to corporate credit card programs in the commercial sector, where banks provide payment infrastructure, reporting tools, and rebate incentives to the government. While the official contract expiration date isn't until 2029 as it runs on 10-year contract terms, the government has already begun preparing for negotiations, and FederalTrust Bank expects the formal request for a proposal, or RFP as I might call it, to be released within the next year. Federal Trust must now decide whether they should bid on the contract to challenge the incumbents or should focus on its resources elsewhere.
Got it. Okay, that's a lot of info. So just to check my understanding, the client is Federal Trust Bank. They're considering bidding for a contract for the government purchase card program. So there'd be a highly competitive bidding process, and they're saying it's strategically important. They want to increase their exposure to the government sector. So there's a few data points in here: 40 billion in payments annually through the program. And the revenue for the bidders comes from net refunds. So basically like a corporate credit card where the banking partner would need to provide a bunch of payment infrastructure and reporting. So there's a bunch of needs we need to consider. And we set a 10-year contract starting in 2029. So we've definitely got some runway in terms of time. Objective is, should we compete or focus elsewhere? Basically go, no go. Is that all right?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic summary.
Okay. Can I ask a few questions before going into my structure?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So first, I just wanted to clarify the goal a little bit here. It sounds like it's not purely financial and there might be a strategic element to consider, right? Like how do I think about that?
Yeah. So I think that's a fantastic a way to approach it. So the main goal from Federal Trust is to expand its market share to compete with larger banks, so like the Citis, the Goldmans, the JP Morgans of the world.
Hmm.
It aims to establish a foothold in the public sector. So it's where its competitors have traditionally been less focused, but it sees a potential opportunity there. But I will say that it still sees this as an opportunity to be profitable, and that is certainly a component that should not be ignored.
Okay, that's really clear. Another question, I want to understand really the business model that they would think about for their bids here. You mentioned they make money through net refunds, but I guess how exactly does that work? I imagine there's like a fee structure or something on the net
Yep.
refunds.
Yep, you're definitely on the right path. So banks earn revenue from interchange fees and foreign exchange or other transaction fees. So all of these are subject to negotiation in the proposal process, but each is a percentage per transaction and expected to be in the range if it's an interchange fee of
Hmm.
0.1% to about 0.2% of
Okay,
that total for the transaction. And then foreign exchange or other transaction fees, you can kind of group that into just one category, is about 0.5 to about 1%.
got it. Understood. And then I guess last question, Federal Trust, how would they evaluate an opportunity like this to decide if they should compete or not?
Yep. I think that you kind of phrase it as a bid, no bid decision. I think that's a great way to think about this. And there's two primary criteria. Is One, does it strategically align with, who they are and where they want to go? Kind of reference that market share piece in public sector. But
Mhm.
two, and kind of alluded to this earlier, was the profit feasibility. Can this be consistently profitable throughout that 10-year contract?
Awesome, thanks. So I think I have what I need. Can I take a second to make a structure?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I have a structure here, if you can see that. I'm thinking about this in terms of four buckets here. The first is really on the profitability piece, really digging into the financials. So I want to better understand first revenue generation up top. So looking at what are the expected net refunds, and then looking at margin share, how those transaction fees interact, and then lastly, I think there's a piece around growth potential, looking at what is this market doing, and how do we expect those trends to continue in the future, starting at 2029 onwards. The next piece here would be investments and cost. So definitely want to understand what the costs look like. And then if there's any potential for cost reduction in any way that we can make this more profitable for ourselves. Second piece is on strategic fit. Really want to understand our capabilities and do we have what it takes to compete in this effectively, or is there anything we need to grow? And then really the value alignment piece, like does this work actually align with our mission as a company and what we want to do? Um, Third bucket is competitive positioning. So really want to understand these evaluation criteria, understanding what this RFP will look like and how we'll be evaluated. There'll be a price element, I'm sure, and then there's going to be some other kind of considerations around like, what else you bring to the table. Third is competitive, or next kind of sub bucket in that third bucket would be the landscape, understanding the competitive landscape, who the incumbents would be, and how we compare with them in terms of size and capabilities. And then last in competitive positioning is value proposition. Basically, what unique things about us as a company would we be able to bring to this? The last bucket I have here is alternatives. When I think about going into an RFP and investing all the time and effort and money that would be required to win, I want to consider like what is required in terms of our resources to do this effectively, and then what other alternatives do we have? Are there other opportunities that would be a better use of our time and money? Yeah, so I guess starting out, I would think, the first bucket of profitability and looking into the revenue generation piece would be the best place to go, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, excellent. Well, before we move on, I would just like to say, that last category of kind of alternatives of, is there a better place for us to be putting our, intellectual capital, financial capital, I thought was fantastic.
Here's some feedback from Ben. Chris did well to create clarity on what the objective of the case is, especially for such a complicated and dense prompt. When you're faced with a business problem where you're not 100% sure how the client's actually making money, it's good to get clear on how the business model works, what's being sold, and how does our client win in this particular case. Chris's framework takes an overwhelming, messy prompt and makes it feel approachable. He speaks with confidence and translates from the jargon of the specific case into the higher level business objectives that need to be attacked.
I'm on with the direction as well. So I have a chart that I would like to share with you, and certainly would like your assistance with being able to help me out with next steps. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Please let me know if there's any issues along the way. So with that, would love your help in being able to estimate two things. One, the total value of the net refund rate for the government through 2028, so current contract end date, as a total number, but then also the second part, the value of the net refund rate as a total number over the next 10 years beyond 2028. So for that new contract that we would perhaps hold and possess. And if I can give a little context to the chart, and then we'll let you take it from there. So the net refund rate is the percentage of total transaction volume that banks return to the government as rebates. So similar to cashback incentives in commercial credit card programs. It's the equivalent to revenue for the government paid by the bank. So over time, the government has negotiated higher refund rates for transactions, which has led to those, like blips or increased revenue that you see for government over time.
Got it. Got it. So then the time periods that I'm seeing here on the x-axis, these are three distinct time periods or 10-year chunks per contract.
That is a correct understanding.
Okay. And then the last one, I guess, is only partial. We're halfway through the contract of the existing incumbent. Perfect. So your first item is basically extrapolate the current contract for its final 5 years. So it looks like we're starting out now at about 435 million, and it ends at 472 million. Great. So that's a difference of $37 million. If I work that out as a percentage, 37 over 435, that's a little bit less than 10%. So I'd put it in the ballpark of about 8%. And basically, we're halfway through the time frame. We would be doubling that. If we assume the same growth rate, that 8%, I could just add 37 million again on top of that the 472. So that brings us to 509 million. So we're really in like a $510 million ballpark here. Yeah, so that's where I would see this going if we assume the same growth rate. And then your second question here is getting the future values from 2028 to 2038. So I would need to figure out that starting point and the ending point. So I guess I'll take as my starting point 509. And then 10 years later, if I assume that same constant 8% growth rate that we looked at, or 8% growth every 5 years, then yeah, the way I'll get that is so 8% out of 510. That's going to put us at 550 at the midpoint. And then 8% of that, roughly another $50 million. So if I do 550 plus 50, I guess our end point is going to be $600 million. So what I would assume is that the start of the contract, 2028, we are at 509 million, and then we would be ending it at about 600 million. So these are pretty big numbers. I guess the disclaimer I would want to add is, right, we are just taking the same growth rate now, and we've extrapolated it out 15 years into the future, effectively. Which to me feels like a bit of an aggressive assumption, to assume we can just keep growing at the same rate constantly. So I would think about it more as this $600 million at the end is kind of an upper bound, and most likely will be sitting somewhere lower than this.
Interesting. And so I think that's a fantastic perspective. And, would you have an estimate roughly to say, if we do end up a little south of the number or the figure that you calculated, where that might be?
Yeah, it's a good push. I mean, I would say, if we consider the 8% to keep going for this next 5 years, and we're starting out at 509, maybe a lower bound would be to assume a 5% growth for the future as opposed to 8%.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair estimate.
Here's some feedback from Ben. The case continues to be a bit complicated and challenging, and Chris does a good job to articulate what he's doing in his calculations before executing on coming up with the actual numbers. Chris does a good job to state his key assumptions out loud, like throwing out a disclaimer that the growth rate may not stay the same over the course of the projection. Chris does well to figure out the growth rate in the chart to help project forward what the revenues will look like in the future. There was an opportunity here to reference current events, with the new administration potentially reducing government spending overall.
I now want to, still stay on the financial side, but maybe even look at the profitability of, these estimates, because, naturally I referenced that one of the criteria outside of the strategic piece was, does this make money? So top line's great. Is this actually going to calculate a profit? And so would love your help. Federal Trust needs to evaluate the profitability of the bid. Based on your prior projections, they expect federal spend to average about, a little south of 600. We're going to call about 550, which, given the 5%, think is roughly where that puts you at. And it's about 550 billion annually for the 10-year contract. And you can assume that only 8% of total transactions are expected to continue through the program for about 4.6 million active cardholder users. Federal Trust earns revenue from interchange fees and foreign exchange fees, which is those same fee rates that I gave you previously. But just for a reminder for everyone, interchange fee is about 0.1% to about 0.2%. And then foreign exchange and other transaction fees are about 0.5% to about 1%. And additionally, I'm going to go ahead and give you a table provided that shows the expected cost per user. So given the financials, if you could help me understand what is Federal Trust expected annual profit from the program. And again, I'm going to go ahead and put that up on screen, but if there's any issues or problems with that, please just let me know.
This is the cost elements of the profitability question. So we're looking at a range of $30 to $100 as a cost per user. I'm assuming this would be an annual cost.
Correct.
Okay. Good stuff. It looks like a pretty wide range across the boards. That's interesting. Okay, so I guess the question then is profitability. How does this thing stack up from a profit standpoint? This question is obviously going to have two sides to it. There's the revenue side and the cost side. And it looks like you gave a bunch of data for the revenue side, and we have this table for cost. So I'm going to write out my revenue equation here. So is this coming through here?
It is.
Okay, awesome. So really what we've got here is it's going to be the revenue will be made up of the federal spend multiplied by the percentage of users on the program, right? So a proportion of that federal spend. And then we have the fees that we need to put on top of that to make up our revenues. So putting numbers to that, we have this 550 billion spend number that we talked about. And then we talked about 8% of that is coming through our program. So if I do 8% of 550 billion, I can do 10% and then subtract another 2%. So 10% would be 55 billion, and then 2% of it would be 11. So I'll subtract the 11. What we're left with here, $44 billion. So there's 44 billion coming through the platform. Now we need to talk about those fees. So the fees you mentioned, there's these two fees, both of which have a range to them. So one of the bounds was 0.1% on the lower bound, and then 0.2% on the higher bound. The other fee is 0.5% on the lower bound and 1% on the higher bound. So if I add those together, we have a low case that's 0.6% and a high case of 1.2%. Awesome. So basically, I'm going to take that $44 billion that we calculated and I'll multiply it by 0.6, and then I'll multiply it by 1.2. So on the lower case, the 0.6%, here we go. I'll just do the math here. It is 0.24 billion. Okay. And then basically I can double that to get to 1.2. I guess 0.6% is half of 1.2% in the high case. So that puts it at 0.48 billion. I guess, taking the decimals out here, we're looking at 240 million and $480 million in the high and low case. So that's one side. That's the revenue side of the equation here. Now we have this table for costs. Awesome. So again, we have some pretty big ranges. So it looks like $30 and $100. So here we're going to need that user base number. You mentioned the user base was 4.6 million, right? We didn't use that in the revenue side. Okay. So here we'll have a low $30 and we'll multiply that by the 4.6 million. So if we multiply by 2, that is 13.8. Or so multiply by 3 is 13.8, multiply by 10. Okay. $138 million in costs. On the high, it's $100 times 4.6. That gets us to 460 million. I don't know if you can see that here.
Yep,
But yeah,
I'm with you.
that is a pretty big range in cost base, I guess reflective of the big range in the unit cost per user. Okay. So really what we're left with is we have revenues and costs. We have 2 scenarios for each. If we start playing with these together, I think we'll have to have 4 scenarios if that's okay.
Please.
Okay. Give me 1 second here. So I've written out a table here with 4 rows to it. There's high revenue, high cost, high revenue, low cost, and then low revenue, high cost, low revenue, low cost. So I think we need to assess the profits in each of these 4 scenarios and come up with a picture of what that looks like. So in our first row, we've got 480 million and 460 cost. So that is easy enough. We've got 20 million. It's positive profitability. Next scenario, 480 million revenue, and we have 138 cost, which is great. So higher profitability here, 342 million. Awesome. Okay, low revenue scenario. We've got half of that in revenue. We've got 248 million in revenue and 460 million in cost. So this one is not going to look good. We are looking at negative $220 million, almost negative $250 million. That's not a good situation. And then last scenario, low revenue, low cost, 240 million revenue, 138 million in cost. So here we are positive, 102 million. So at the end here, I've got the results. Really what it looks like is 3 out of these scenarios, 3 out of the 4 scenarios have positive profitability. There is that third scenario, low revenue, high costs. That's concerning. It's kind of a worst case scenario where it's significantly negative. We're losing $220 million. That's not good. I think pulling up a level on this, it's an okay picture because, I mean, on the revenue side, we're considering the levers to pull here would be there's the 8% penetration rate into federal spend for our customers. So we haven't really touched that lever. I think there's potential for growth opportunity that we could play with. The other components of revenue, if we go back to this calculation, there's like federal spend, our penetration rate at 8%, and the fees. Federal spend probably hard to play with. The fee percentage also probably hard. I think our best bet for lever to pull is this factor here of the penetration rate. Maybe there are things we could do to increase that 8%, and that would help, bump revenue up. On the cost side of things too, I mean, we have a pretty huge range here. I'm not sure why there's such wide ranges, but it might be good to do more due diligence and kind of pressure test the banding there. So I would say it's not an immediate yes, but if we have 3 out of the 4 scenarios, I think it's positive and it's positive enough that we should do some digging into those additional levers there.
Here's some feedback from Ben. These were multi-step, complicated calculations, and Chris did well to explain everything he was about to do before he did it. Chris's calculations were quite efficient. He used some tricks, including that 8% is the same as 10% minus 2%, both of which are individually easier to calculate. These shortcuts allowed him to effectively get through the calculations and get to the business insights of what the math was showing. After completing these calculations, Chris immediately pulls up a level to describe the implications of his calculations. He talks about which levers are possibly movable and what the client might want to do to try and change some of the key numbers that were affecting the overall profitability.
So, as you kind of broke down those different factors working into it, I want to jump on. I think it was the first one you had referenced, that kind of a growth opportunity. So recognizing that increasing the number of government employees that use purchase cards, would boost revenue for the bank. It would also increase refunds for the government. So it seems like it would be beneficial both ways. I imagine there's some government cost savings there too if they're bulk buying. What features or programs could Federal Trust implement that could drive greater card adoption or usage among federal employees to try and start teetering that up a little more?
Yeah. Oh, good question. Good question. That's really going to be the heart of this, is how we increase that number. Okay. Do you mind if I take a second to just structure my thoughts here?
Please.
Thinking about this, I have four kind of buckets that I think would be helpful in answering the question. The first is awareness. Basically, do people know about these cards? And what can we do to boost awareness? The second is ease of sign up. So once they're aware of it and they know about the program, how easy is it for them to get on the program? And then I guess the next step is, can it be used? How easy is this thing to use? How many stores is it accepted in? And then the last piece is kind of around benefits, like what is going to make people want to use it beyond what we talked about above? Like, are there benefits that they get that would really drive people to want to sign up for this? So talking about the first thing on awareness, I mean, to me, I feel like this really comes down to communication and marketing and making people aware of it. So this would be things like, some kind of an email blast through their employer. Like if you work at a government agency, you could have that agency send around to everybody, hey, here's this new program, you should take advantage of it. There could be like hard copy papers, like posters and flyers and stuff, like in the offices. And, maybe even some kind of a sign-up drive, like an in-person booth at the office in their cafeteria. But it's really just to kind of force people to be aware of it, getting in their space, and really focusing like the messaging on the benefits of why this thing is good for you. The second bucket, I guess, is ease of sign up. So it's really how difficult is this card to get? So I'd be looking at the sign up process, like are there long forms? Like maybe we can really consolidate those, make it a little easier to apply. Are there in-person requirements? Like, do you have to file paperwork physically at some office, or can you do this online? And, if not, maybe we should make it digital and have like a hurdle sign-up process. And then also maybe some other hurdles that could be in place here, like credit ratings. Like, I don't know if you need to have a certain credit rating to get this card, but reducing those hurdles or kind of exclusion criteria for people who might not make the cut. So you kind of open up the pool a little bit wider. The third piece is ease of use. Basically, how do you use it? The main thing I'm thinking about is like, some places only do Visa. They don't take Amex or MasterCard. So like, what proportion of stores actually accept this card? And really trying to build out your partnership of retailers who, would be interested in using the card. And figuring out like, are there barriers or reasons why retailers wouldn't want to use this card? And if so, addressing those. And then the last piece is really benefits, or like what do they get from this? So from a benefit standpoint, it could be things like, do you get points? Like, can you use those points on travel and purchases? Are there any other new kind of point related programs that can be included? Another thing, I guess I'm thinking like mobile capabilities. Like, is there an app people could have on their phone? Is it user friendly? If there isn't an app, we should probably make one. Um, Customer support would be another big one for any kind of financial product. So, first off, are there chatbots? Are these like well-performing AI integrated chatbots, or is this just a kind of like, an FAQ page on a website, as an example? Is there phone support? And if so, how long are wait times typically? And then I think the last thing I'm thinking about for financial products would be security. So like fraud monitoring, if they don't have a program, it'd be great to make one. Any kind of data security, having a good protocol in place there. It's really just kind of making people feel secure, like this card is worthwhile and will, doesn't present kind of undue risks compared to other credit card options they might have.
Yeah. Chris, I love all four of those ideas. I mean, there's a real blend. There's incentives in there, there's friction points in there. So, I really get the idea. Maybe before we move on, of those four kind of groups or categories, which one do you believe, prioritize first? This one's really going to move that 8% up the
Mhm.
most out of those four. Maybe the one that says, if we have time, that's great, but maybe deprioritizing that to
Yeah.
last.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we have an 8% penetration rate right now, which feels very low to me. My assumption would be that most people are just not really aware of it. So I think the easiest driver to use, and probably the lowest cost one as well, is just increasing people's awareness. I mean, sending email blasts and having marketing material in person at their offices, I think is probably the easiest way to just get more people aware of this thing.
Excellent.
Here's some feedback from Ben. We're 25 minutes into a case, and we just completed a marathon math section. It would be easy to start brain dumping any random ideas that came up in Chris's mind. Chris did really well to stay structured and poised, even deep into a case. Again, Chris comes back to fundamentals to make a huge billion-dollar program feel approachable and understandable as you're thinking about the business implications of the decisions on the table. Chris handled the prioritization follow-up question well. This is a question you can reasonably anticipate having to answer after you complete any structure during your case.
So, Chris, managing director of the public sector business development team from Federal Trust is en route, wants kind of your bid, no bid decision. Based on the analysis, what do you have to say? What's the final recommendation for them?
All right, great. Mind if I take just 10 seconds to structure things out for myself?
Please.
Okay. So my recommendation here is yes, Federal Trust should proceed to go after this bid. And it's based on several things. Right now, we see the size of this market has had a lot of growth, and we're expecting this market to continue growing, which is a great sign. And from a financial standpoint, 3 out of the 4 scenarios we looked at showed this would be profitable. And that's even before we factor in any kind of growth improvements that we could drive in the program ourselves. So I think it is worth proceeding. It does come with some risks. I think mostly the cost assessment has such a big range to me, and I think that probably stems from our lack of experience with government work. If we're doing an internal cost estimate, we, to feel secure, we're probably putting wide ranges on there ourselves. So really, as a next step, I recommend that as part of preparing for the bid, we really want to dive into that element and better understand what it takes to serve a government customer and really try to tighten up the bounds of that cost component. And I guess in addition to that, looking into what kind of growth like levers we can pull above that 8% user base. But I really think that playing with both of those levers is going to be very important for drafting a competitive bid against the incumbents who do this already.
Excellent. Chris, thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.
Here's some feedback from Ben. Chris's recommendation is clear. Yes, we should go after this bid. It was a complicated case with detailed math, but it all boils down to a straightforward, confident, yes, let's do this. Second, Chris did well to pull data from his math analysis during the case. It's clear that he was understanding what the implication of those calculations were and translating it back to the original question, even here in the recommendation for what the client should do.
Hey everyone, it's Kenton Koveski here, the founder of Rocketblocks. Thank you so much for watching this mock interview video. I hope you found it informative and helpful as you are getting ready to prepare for your own interviews and hopefully landing that job offer you are excited about. We have a ton of great content on the Rocketblocks channel coming out on a weekly basis, mock interviews, mini lessons, and chats with our Rocketblocks experts. So if you haven't subscribed yet already, please do so. There is a big red button below. And if you hit that, you'll get all of our content as soon as it comes out. Thanks for watching and have a great day.